Hello and welcome to Software Around the Globe version number 0, the pilot, we will say, the beta testing. I'm Brujo. Over there you have Mono.
Hi there.
Yep, from the Netherlands. And we are happy to have you here. Today we will have two talks. And originally, one by me, one by him. Eventually, in the upcoming, if this goes well, in the next meetings, we will have more speakers, more different talks. Our goal is to talk about everything software related. In particular, today we will have a talk about my experience being both a developer and a technical lead. And Mono will talk about the framework. Mono, do you want to describe your talk?
Yeah, basically, over the past year, I created my own web framework. But rather than talk about the framework in super detail, I just want to talk about certain patterns that I came across as either problems or solutions in that area. So that's what I'm going to talk about.
Okay, let's see how it goes. Remember, you can write your comments on YouTube, and we will be watching that and replying to them during the talk. And since we are right on time, I will start sharing my screen and let the meeting begin. Okay. So this is my talk. This is the talk a little bit personal, more personal than I used to do. This one is about my experience as both a developer and a manager, and why I switched back and forth from each role to the other, and what I learned in the process. This is me. I am Fernando, but that's just for customs, the police, and my mother. Everybody else calls me Brujo. I was born a long time ago, in 1981. 10 years later, I started developing small pieces of BASIC for Commodore. And then somebody got me a very good computer, and I started with QBasic. And it took me another 10 years of continuous learning as a child, but still to start working professionally. As soon as I finished high school, I started working as a Visual Basic 6 developer. Then from that, I moved to .NET, and finally, I got to Erlang. And if you're wondering how do you jump from .NET to Erlang, I will tell you in this talk. I jumped from .NET to being a tech lead, then I dropped everything, and then I started all over again with Erlang. I am a computer scientist from University of Buenos Aires, where I learned many other things, mostly related to software development. I am an open source enthusiast. I have a community of friends with which we maintain a lot of open source projects, and I contribute to many others. I think that's the way to go if you want to be a successful developer. I also train people in Erlang in particular, but also in software development in general. I write my blog. I have two of them. One is slightly more popular than the other. The first one is Erlang Battleground, which is a blog based on Erlang. And another one is Tech Lead Talks, which is based on my experience as a tech lead. I do like walking really, really long distances. I am a father, and when I have time, which is not usual, I organize games and stuff for people like on the open, like on the streets and the subway, etc. So what I will talk today, my career path, it looks like that road. I started as a developer just for fun. Then I progressed and started earning money for developing programs. But as soon as I became really good at my job, I was promoted to team lead, then tech lead, then software architect, and then I was kind of the CTO of the company. And I quit. And I went back to being a developer again, but in a different technology, as I said before, this time in Erlang. I joined the company. I started working as a developer. And eventually, I, again, became very good at what I did. So good so that I was again promoted, and that again I was promoted to CTO position, straight up this time, and I spent 2 or 3 years being the CTO of Inaka. You can read about that in my blog. But basically, after a couple of years this time, I quit again, and I am a developer again right now. It's a very winding road, and I did many changes. And in those processes, I learned many different things. Some of them I will teach, or I will try to share today. The first one is that it's something that I have on my mind a couple of years ago. To me, the world seems pretty straightforward. You either want to be a developer or you want to be a leader, and you eventually are a developer. You're working as a developer or you're working as a tech lead. If those don't match, you are unhappy. If those match, you are happy. But the world and the reality is never that easy. It's more like this, where yes, you are kind of a developer, but somehow you are also managing people partially. You're never sure what your position is, and you're not unhappy just because you are in a position with more management roles than the ones you want. Sometimes you are kind of happy, and sometimes you don't even know what you want, and sometimes you don't even know what you are working at. Maybe your company has no roles defined, and every time they need something, anybody can do it, and that may turn out to be confusing. And I think this reality is not good for the developer, and also it's not good for the company. I will try to tell you why. So, in general, many companies, at least most that I knew, they don't have a defined career path. And I'm very honest here. The first time somebody told me to create a career path for my company, I was skeptical. I thought that will limit us. We will not be able to grow on our own, right? Once you set up your path, it will be impossible to move away from it. And that's not true, especially if your career path is simple or flexible. But if you don't have a career path in your company, the problem arises when you need to ask this question: what does it mean to grow there? So you are a developer, you became an excellent developer, and then what? If you don't know, if your company doesn't know, the most likely scenario is that they put you in a leader position, because, I don't know, that's kind of scaling within a company. And so if they do that, that might not be the path you want to follow. And that happens because there is no defined career path. Neither you know where to go, how to grow in the company, neither the company. The company doesn't know where to place you according to the value they think you have. And it's all with good intentions, but it may end up being super stressful, and it may hinder performance on the developer, on the company, and also on the relationship between those two, which is what happened at my first company. So the first lesson I want to share is have a well-defined career path. If you are a developer, when you are in an interview, ask for it. Ask the interviewer, okay, yeah, you are hiring me for this position, but what will happen if I want to grow within the company? If it is, if you want to promote me, where will I be promoted to, right? Ask for a career path and get them to think about a long-term view. Also, if you're a developer and you are already in a company, ask your manager, ask somebody else, and check what has the company offer as a possibility to grow within it? Maybe also ask yourself, what is your desired career path? And check if those two match, because otherwise, eventually, you will get to a point where you don't want to be doing what you're doing, and that's terrible. And if you own a company, if you manage a company, invest some time. Use some time to define the career path. You don't need to create a new one and push it. Just define what you currently have and ask yourself, where will my employees be in a couple of years or next year, or when we grow from the size the company has now to double? Because you will need something there. You can have career paths that are purely individual contributor based. So each contributor has his own career path, and they move from whatever, junior, semi-senior, senior, etc. Or you can have career paths for the whole company where, leadership, and they grow up in the company graph, right? Whatever, maybe a combination of both. Where at INACA we had a combination of both. We even had that concept that any individual contributor may be in multiple places along the career path at the same time. That was not the problem for us. But if you don't know that, if you don't know how growth is reflected in your company, it will be impossible to answer the question of what happens when we grow properly. So that's lesson 1. Now let's go with another one. And this one is, say, all right, career path or not, eventually you are promoted to tech lead, right? You were a developer until yesterday, and now you got a promotion to lead people. First of all, even if your the card you hold for the company changes the text, and from one day to the other you moved from developer to tech lead, that the actual change won't happen overnight. It's not like magical. You don't just become a tech lead. It generally has a process where you become less developer and more tech lead over time, until one day you find yourself and you say, all right, I'm not a developer anymore. Even if I had that title, in my second company at INACA, I had my title of CTO for a year before I recognized that I actually was a CTO. In my mind, I still was a developer with some extra roles. But eventually you come to that realization. And when that happens, you won't be prepared for it, because it's something that nobody tells you how to do. My first big wall, the first big wall that I hit both times that I became a tech lead, was to find out that I had no training for that role. I had to wing it. I had to learn on the road, and that's something that doesn't happen for programmers. Yeah, you can be self-taught, right? You can read tutorials, you can practice online, you can learn with friends, etc. But you have you have like a path to learn how to write programs, or how to create software with a language or with a framework or with a tool, etc. For leadership, it's not that easy. In general, there are no good ways, particularly not free ones, to be ready for this. So my second lesson, both for the developers that either are tech leads now or are on the road to become one, and for the companies that promote people from developer to tech lead, is invest time in learning. For the companies in particular, I know companies send developers to conferences or pay for books or give them time to learn new languages, to try new tools, to even apply new software developer methodologies. That doesn't happen in general for project managers, for tech leads, and of course not for CTOs. While I was a CTO, I was going to conferences, but they were Erlang conferences. Like I was still going as a developer. So my lesson here is that it needs to be some investment there so that the person that is assigned to a manager role, a tech lead role, can use their time to learn how to do that job well. But you will ask, yeah, but what is it to learn? What do you need to learn to be a tech lead? Many things. And I will list just those that I know for sure that you need to learn. But there are many, many others. In particular, I will tell you these ones. These ones were things that I learned as a CTO, because as a CTO, I had the chance to determine in which things to invest my own time, and I actually invested it in learning these kind of things. So the first one is how to talk to another individual. And it seems crazy, right? Everybody knows how to talk. But if you have one-on-one meetings, you want those to be really productive. And if you're not a people person, or if you don't have enough empathy, and that is not a bad thing, it's just something that you have to learn how to improve, those meetings will be terrible. And on one-on-ones, in my experience, there is no middle ground. There are no so-so meetings. Those are either excellent or terrible. And you don't want terrible one-on-ones. You want your relationship with each of your individual contributors to be bad. So you have to learn how to get the best out of those. And of course, you have to do those meetings. Those meetings are crucial. It's not like you can be a CTO without ever talking one-on-one with people. So that's one thing. The next item in the list is managing crisis. Because as soon as you become a leader, people will expect you to solve every single problem. Even when the way you solve it is by getting people together to work on it, that's fine, but you are in charge. And so you have to deal with that. Some people, and in front of a crisis, they just stress out or just don't function well. Learning how to manage yourself and deal with that is very important. And it's something that can be learned. It's not built in. Then another one that to me it was easier because I am also a trainer, but I have to understand that I needed to invest time in this, which is mentoring. As a tech lead, you are supposed to train people, especially newcomers, but also the experienced developers. You have to lead people to build the systems that you have on your mind, because you will not be coding anymore. You have to transmit your knowledge to others. It's rewarding, but it's something you have to learn to do right. Then, of course, related to all these things, eventually you have to give feedback. You have to tell your employees how good they are, what's their performance, and how awesome they are, right? And you have to do it right. And you also have to criticize correctly and positively to get the best out of everybody. Again, that's not easy, but it's possible to learn that. Of course, you have to learn development methodologies. You can probably choose one for your company, depending on your position there. You are probably the one that will decide how development works in your company. So you have to learn what options you have, and investing time in that is good, even if you are not a tech lead. If you are a developer, it's also good. Of course, you have to learn how to define career paths, as I said before. And of course, and this is really tough, you will probably be involved, even if you're not if you have a human resources department or whatever, you will certainly be involved in hiring and firing people. Hiring people, maybe it might not be that hard. Running proper interviews is a whole new subject, but it's not emotionally hard. Firing people, it's really hard, and it's something that you will eventually be involved in, and you want to be prepared for that. So investing time in learning that kind of things is also important. As I said, conducting interviews. Diversity is something that's always around us in this line of business, and it's not as easy as hiring women. It's much more complex than that, and it's something worth learning, if not for other reasons, just to be a better person, right? A better leader and a better human in general. And most likely, as the face of your company, or as the technical face of your company, you will need to be speaking in public. And that's something that can be super terrifying for people. So improving your skills on that is also a good investment. As you can see, everything here in this list has its other side. As a developer, you don't need to learn maybe the same things, but knowing what you will expect from your manager, it's a good thing. I recommend you, developers, to learn a little bit about these kind of things as well. And the next question is good. Where do you learn all this? There are, when I try it, because the second time I became a leader, I decided since the first time I didn't like it, the second time I decided to invest some time in learning. And so I Googled it to see where I could learn from these things, where I could get resources about this stuff. And it was not easy to find, but there are many other people that did the same thing. They Googled, they tried to find resources and they couldn't, so they created their own. I like to think that I'm one of those, but there's people that has contributed much more than me, like my personal hero in all these things, which is Oren Ellenbogen. This guy runs a mailing list, which also has a website, a book, and a Slack community. It's called Software Lead Weekly. And if you're ever close to be a tech lead, you have to subscribe to that mailing list. Every Friday, you will get 10 links. From those 10 links, on average, 5 are indispensable. They are amazing and accurate and up to the point. And Oren always writes a little summary of those, so you know which ones you want to look. It's really cool. Then you have Rance. Rance is a very famous tech lead, one of the most famous in the world. And he runs Rance in Repose, which is a blog. He has plenty of books written about it. And he also has a Slack community that is massive. It's like, I don't know, but it's hundreds of people there. I know for developers, hundreds of people is nothing, but imagine that those 100 people are CTOs, project managers, tech leads in companies like Netflix, Amazon, Slack itself, etc. So you get to know the community of people like you, which is not something common. And also the blog by Michael is amazing. It's always important to be reading that one. Then you have Marcus. Marcus is a guy that is it comes from a different background as other people. He was a developer, but he's more like he feels much more comfortable on the leader side. And basically, he has a blog. He wrote books. He has you can find him in the other Slack communities. He runs a website. And he does mentoring a little bit for free, but then you have to pay. He has videos on YouTube, etc., etc. It's like an all-star tech lead trainer. Camille was the tech lead of Rent the Runway, and she writes a blog. She wrote, I think, 2 books, and she's particularly active on Twitter. And she's a really, really smart woman, and also a very nice writer. It's a pleasure to read their articles, and she knows a lot. And finally, a friend of mine, Yegor, he's a Java developer that doesn't want to be a tech lead, but he kind of is, because he has his own company, but he doesn't want to have positions in the company. But every blog he writes, you can tell that he's leading that company, and you can learn a lot of how he is doing that. So there are many scattered resources, but the possibilities of learning are there. Now, let's talk a little bit about what is hard about being a tech lead. Because, as I said, every time I was a tech lead, I ended up quitting, right? And becoming a developer again. So what happened? What's the difficult thing about being a tech lead? Okay, I will tell you my list of challenges that I faced, and I will try to be as objective as I can, but of course, my experience will permeate on this list. So bear with me. This is my talk. I'm sorry for you. So the first one is, of course, you are a tech lead now. You have a new level of responsibility. You no longer are responsible only for writing a piece of code and making sure the test passed. Now, it's you don't get to get away with, hey, that's not my code. Run a git blame. It's not me, right? Or I never touched that. That's another subsystem, not mine. That kind of things never happens again. Sorry. You are the one responsible for the systems where you work. And that means you get to be the face with the client, with your users, with your boss, etc. And you own the whole system now, which is, in this way, is the opposite as Spider-Man. With big responsibility comes big power. You own a system. That whole thing that you might have conceived in your mind before it all becomes something, is now yours. So it's great. But on the other hand, anything inside it, even the things that you don't like, they are also yours. And your responsibility is to present those as if you are the one who built the thing yourself. It's not easy, but it has its upside if it's if the people you manage are great and the system you build is amazing. Then you have to, at some point, you have to see, you always ask yourself how good I am at what I'm doing, right? As a developer, even if it's not exactly tangible, you get a sense of it, because, say, every single pull request you create goes in with praise, or it's merged without much comment, or if your job was to scale test the system and you got it to run better than expected or as expected, or if you develop things and deploy them in time, etc., etc., etc. That kind of thing you can sort of measure in a much faster way, or in a quicker way, than if you want to measure the performance of the tech lead. Because to measure the performance of a tech lead, you have to account for how the team that he's leading performs, how the system in general works, and not for individual contributions. It has to be for the whole thing, which, again, you can see as a half full glass as well. If you are measured by small things, you get small good performance, right? You can be an excellent developer, but you are invisible to the world. And instead, if you're a tech lead and you're measured by the performance of the whole system you're building with your team, then you get enormous recognition. Of course, if all goes south, it will be much worse for you than the developers. But that's kind of the price you pay. And then this one is one of the worst. It was one of the most complicated things in my life as a tech lead. I don't know if I put the title correctly. I'm not sure if it's empathy what I mean, but my challenge here was that at some point as a developer I knew stuff, and since I was involved in, say, writing code or doing code reviews, I could be sure that what I knew was applied to the product we were building. Say good practices, say good code style, using the right tools, etc. As a tech lead, you are much more far away from that. That's developers' world. And so if you know how things should be done, you gotta say that. You cannot simply wait until they are not done the way you want it and then complain. That's bad. So you have to explain even things that in your mind seems stupid and obvious. And that for me was a real challenge. But it also lead me to learn how to do this in my life. And I'm telling you, even if you're not tech leads, if you're just developers, learning these things is awesome. It helps you beyond the world of programming and developing and creating software. So it's a good thing in the end. Then, of course, the obvious one. If you're a tech lead, you will be talking, my friend. You will be having meetings and meetings and meetings and meetings. And there is this kind of approach to this thing. Since you were a developer, when you start getting more and more meetings during the day, you feel tired. You feel like you're not being productive at all. And so what can you do? You can complain about it. You can like be in pain for all the meetings you have, or you can learn how to get the best out of those meetings. And I'm not saying I learned that. I certainly didn't. But I was on that path until I quit. So basically, learning how to conduct a meeting in a way that is productive for everyone and it's not a waste of time, and even scheduling meetings appropriately is something worth learning. And if you're a developer, is also something worth learning, because it will transform something that is a pain for you, that is something that you will complain every time, into something that you might end up I wouldn't say enjoying, but at least using in your advantage. So again, a good thing to learn, a difficult one, but a good thing. And my favorite one, and this one is all positive for me. There is something as a developer where you put yourself into the computer, you choose your Jira task or your GitHub issue, and you start working at 8 a.m. and you work and work and work until it's done. Right? You face one problem, you fix one bug, and that's the whole day. That never ever happens as a tech lead. Particularly if as a tech lead you find yourself one day doing the same thing for 4 hours, you get that feeling that something is wrong. Something must be hiding somewhere, or people are not talking to you for whatever reason, or there is something fishy. As a tech lead, you're generally multitasking. You're jumping from one project to the other. Your mind gets used to keeping context in a corner of it, so that you can easily come back to what you were doing after solving whatever problem the developer has, or the client, whatever the client wants to talk to you about on the phone. And that skill I think, like for me, it was awesome, and it still is. I can still, even I'm now working remotely and whatnot, but I can still jump in different Slack channels or take care of things out of my specific assignment. I still need, of course, those moments where you have to focus because the problem that you have at hand it's incomprehensible, but it's not all the time. And being able to multitask is something good. And so yeah, it's a challenge. But again, as the previous one, learning to do it is a skill that will be useful for you even if you're not a tech lead. And the last one, that's the popular one. If you Google what are the challenges of becoming a tech lead after you've been a developer, you will see that every single time. The imposter syndrome is basically the psychological effect that you get when you think you're cheating others. Because even when you have a card that says CTO there, you know within you that you are not a CTO, that you're just faking it the best that you can. And then you wonder how much long that lie will last. Again, if you Google it, you will see people that went through imposter syndrome for years, waiting every day to be called by their bosses and expecting their bosses to tell them that they are fired because they were not good at the job. While at the same time, if you check what other people is saying about them, everybody says that they are amazing leads. I don't know exactly why this happened. I don't think anybody knows, but I know that it happened to me, and I know why. It was because I wasn't able to figure out how good I was at my job until I had someone else to compare with. Let me tell you a little bit about my experience. So I became Inaka's CTO, and I was the CTO of Inaka for a year, more or less, until Erlang Solutions acquired us. That's when imposter syndrome hit me really hard, because my feeling there was that as soon as I joined Erlang Solutions teams, I would be spotted, right? That they will realize that I was just faking this CTO thing. And turns out I ended up teaching them a lot of it was shared, right? I learned from them, but I also taught them many things that I learned as being a CTO just by, researching on the internet or just by experience or whatnot. And that realization was related to the fact that before I had somebody else to check on, I wasn't sure how good I was. And so I think this happens multiple times, because particularly when you go up really fast and really high on the chart, on the company chart, you get to a point where you don't have others to compare with. That's why communities are important, and having others and knowing others with your same role is a good thing. One may think that the communities are for developers, and you may still be part of the community of your favorite language when you are a tech lead, but you should also join a tech lead community, because that helps you understand your own performance in a way, and probably hopefully get rid of this awful psychological condition. Anyway, to summarize, there are many challenges involved in being a tech lead. Each one of them has its own mirror in something that ends up being actually good, but of course, this kind of role is not easy, especially if you want to do it. If you want to do it really well, if you just want to be, maybe it's not that terrible. But if you want to do your job as a tech lead as well as you do your job as a developer, it's not easy. On the other hand, of course, there are unicorns, right? There are good things. There are actually many good things about being a tech lead. Let me list my favorite ones, so this talk can end up in a cheering way, in an uplifting way. So the first one, you get to define. You not only get to define the culture, or to identify, I would say, not define, but to describe and improve the culture of your company or your team, but you also are required to do so. You are the one in charge of doing that, and that's amazing. That's a place where you can give your team the best of you, and especially if you are like me, who like I am super involved in these kind of things. I really like transmitting and fostering good culture on the places I work. It's a really rewarding thing. It's a good responsibility to have. Another one is that at some point, you and your team are one thing, and you are not alone anymore. If it's you don't say, I have to build a whole social network. For those who know me, I have zero experience on front end. I am colorblind. It's impossible for me, but I can do it as a tech lead. So as a developer, I don't get to build, to work on and to build everything I want. But as a tech lead, I probably can, because given a team of people that's much better than me in different areas, I can join them in a joint effort and build great things, great products, improve the culture, and etc. etc. So not being just an individual is also good. It's good because the results or the things you can get are much greater than just a developer. Of course, there are amazing developers that can do incredible things on their own. I'm not discussing that. But I think team effort in general gives better results in faster and more complex areas. Then there is the benefit of helping other people grow. Once you're in this role, you get the chance to help others, since you no longer need to develop yourself or to work on the stuff and focus only on your part of the world. You get the chance to look from above and improve the lives of others. As I said, as a CTO, you get the chance to make developers work more happily, and that is super rewarding. That's an amazing thing. If you do it right, that will give you years of happiness. It's a really good responsibility to have. And of course, you grow as well, because as I said in multiple times during this talk, there are many things that you learn as a tech lead that are also good as a developer. Every time I quit I left my position as a tech lead to go back to developer, I didn't go back to square one. I already have a baggage of things that I could use as a developer to help my team, my project, my tech lead, anybody else, or even myself, to get better, to write better code, to build better systems. So that thing is also good about being a tech lead. So the lesson here is, of course, enjoy the good stuff. There are plenty of it. And it's important to be able to see it. One thing that was super hard for me was to be able to actually spot these kind of things, because it's much easier for me, but I think it's a general thing, to spot the bad stuff, right? When you see something bad, it covers many other things that are good, and it's good. It's important to remember to spot, to put the light on the good stuff, because it is there and it's worth it. So, final lesson, no more slides. The thing, I think, in the end, the message that if you're gonna get any message from this talk, I would like it to be that you have to find your own path. You have to know what you want to be. You have to, as I said at the beginning, you have to know your career path, regardless of the company for which you're working now. But also, it's important to express that within your company, and if you're a developer, to ask for what happens when I grow, when I get better. And for a company, it's important to have its own path and help developers work this way by training, by recognizing the challenges and focusing on the good stuff and moving people through this path. And there is nothing wrong with being a tech lead for a while, and then realizing that you have you want to go back to writing code again, and eventually you become a tech lead again, and eventually you want to write code again, and that's perfectly fine. In each step, you learn more things, and if you keep learning, you will be a better whatever you want. And if you are a better whatever you want, and that thing is exactly what you want, who can be happier, right? It's good for you, and it's good for the company you work for, and if you contribute to others, it's good for the world. Thank you very much. So, questions. Let me put my face instead of the slides here. There you go. Mono, you want to read the questions so I can answer?
Excellent. Yeah, thank you so much for the talk. That was hearing. And we have only one question so far. Everybody else, feel free to send other questions if you have them. And Pablo just asked that Joel Spolsky says, is it meaningless to move people from a position they love and do well to a position they don't like and maybe they are not as good as, for the sake of growing? And Pablo is asking if this statement makes sense to you and if you can contribute on that subject.
I think it makes sense. If it's just for the sake of growing, it is. I think meaningless is the word. The thing may end up contributing to the company, to the developer, etc., but it has to have a purpose, right? If the only purpose is that, hey, you spent 5 years in this company, now it's time to do something else. What else? Be a tech lead? Yeah, another good thing. If you're doing that because as a manager, you see potential in that person, you see that developer can also be a great tech lead, talking to them and helping them grow and eventually becoming a tech lead may be a good thing. Remember, it's also the role of managers to make developers and eventually tech leads happier. So yeah, I agree with Pablo. I think there was another question, more personal one before. Oh yeah, also from Pablo. Yes, Pablo, I organized games in the subway. It was the Were-Mole Hunt, the Captura del Minotopo. So I joined a team of 5 people. We left clues spread around on the subways of Buenos Aires, and eventually the people had to find the Minotopo, which was one of us. But doing some scavenger hunt things in the middle. So it's not that the one that find the Minotopo won, but also they had to talk to foreigners, they have to sing, they have to record the voices on the subway stations, etc., etc. It was really fun, and eventually we will do it again. So I think that's it.
That's very interesting. I wasn't expecting that answer.
Yeah. So if you Google it, it's El Grupo Sorpresivo. You will find it online. It's very old because after that, one of us went to Africa. Another one became a professional swimmer. Another one is the owner of his company. I am a father, and the other one went to Malta. But who can say? Eventually, we might reunite again here and organize another round of that for our children. I don't know. Anyway.
Very cool. Very, very cool.
Mono,
anyway, I don't have a question for you, Brujo, but just a comment on your talk. It's very interesting that you drive home the point that being a tech lead is very different from being a developer, no matter how senior you are as a developer. So, I mean, in retrospective, it should be obvious, but to me, it's like really striking, and yeah, it's a very important thing to know. So, thank you for sharing that.
All right.
Excellent. I don't know if we have any more questions. I don't think so. I don't know. Should I go ahead?
Yeah, share your screen. I will mute myself as soon as you put your slides on.
Excellent. Just give me a minute. Let's see how this is done. Okay, I'm sharing the screen already. Okay, let me know when I should start.
3, 2, 1.
Okay, well, this is my presentation. So anyway, all of you know me. It's a very select group we're talking to today, the beta testing for software around the globe. But anyway, my name is Fede. I'm from Argentina, but I'm working right now and living in the Netherlands. And I've been doing mostly, full stack development all around JavaScript. And well, over the last year and a half, I've been developing my own front-end framework. So I know I wrote my own front-end framework. I'm crazy, indeed. I don't really understand why, and I should probably recourse to therapy to know the real reason. But for whatever reason, I decided to make my own front-end framework. So basically, the goal of this framework is to allow me to create web applications and just solve most of the problems that you encounter with this. So the thing is, I don't want to talk about my framework in a traditional way today, like saying, okay, this is my framework, this is how cool it is, and this is how you create a hello world. Or also, I didn't want to say, hey, this is my framework that I'm doing, and this is how it compares to the big competitors like Angular or React or whatever it is. So I just wanted to do something different, and this is because of Burnout.js, which probably is also a library because everything has JS now. At the end, there's a lot of thriving. The JavaScript ecosystem is really thriving nowadays, in I don't know, the past 3-4 years. But this has also led to a lot of burnout for developers across the board, both burnout for people who work with JavaScript and feel that they have to be constantly learning what's the latest and greatest framework or how do they compare or whatever. You have all these flux of ideas and especially frameworks and categories, and that's it can really burn you out. And even if you're sitting outside of that, you might be sick of hearing about that. So instead, I just wanted to take a couple steps back and focus on patterns instead. I mean, during this process of creating and implementing this framework and then creating a couple of real-world applications with it, I found a few patterns that even if I had to lose all my code, but then I just had to build another framework, these are the lessons that I learned. Some of the patterns are about the nature of the problem itself. What's the nature of a web application in general? I mean, what's patterns I see happening there over and over. A few others are basically patterns that are emerged as solutions to those problem patterns that I found before. And then there's also going to be a couple of implementation patterns, which are kind of like tricks that I found to make this whole thing work. So basically, I just don't want to focus on the specifics. I just want to talk about the patterns or shapes that actually make things work. And I mean, my framework is open source. You can find it there, and it's not widely used at all. But I did manage to create a couple of real-world applications, some of them actually quite complex. So I know this will scale to a certain extent. So that's why I just said that my experience there is moderate with it. So anyway, without further ado, and also last thing, I will try not to show you much code. I'm lying, actually. There is some code here and there, but overall, I'm really trying to keep it lean. So anyway, if you have any questions, just feel free to let me know. As you go, I'll just try to check the questions or whatever. So let's keep on going. So terrain patterns. By this, I refer to the patterns of what front-end web applications entail. By the way, this I don't know how good you can look at this because of the quality of the video, but this basically comes from the work of an architect called Christopher Alexander. It's actually the sequence of how a certain part of Venice evolved over time. The first picture is about 1400, and then the last one is about 1600. And this architect, Christopher Alexander, he basically created the concept of certain patterns that have certain very positive properties. And from here, indirectly, the movement of software patterns emerged later in the 90s. But this guy, Christopher Alexander, is a real inspiration, and I really recommend that you go and check him out. Actually, this is the most important thing I will give you in this talk. So anyway, patterns, they start with Christopher Alexander, at least for me. So anyway, I don't know if you remember before 2005 that we didn't really have web applications. We just had web pages. And a web page was a very simple thing. You just went with your browser to a certain URL, and then you just got that. And then the server replied to you with some HTML and CSS, which was rendered in your browser, and that was it. So the rendering process was done once, and then you would click on a link, you would request a different page, and then the whole process would happen over and over again. So that was basically building web pages back in 2005. But then something happened. After 2005, something entered the picture here, and then web pages started becoming more like web applications. So from a customer, from the perspective of the user, you could say that basically a web app is something more responsive than a website, something that responds faster and also has some kind of offline capability. The thing that really did the change from web page to web application was Ajax. Ajax basically means that the client, which is your browser, can send a request and get some information from the server without refreshing the page. So let's go back to the classical model. You have a link, and then you get a new page from the server, and you refresh the whole thing. Or if you submit a form, and you click on the submit button, which has effectively the same result. You just refresh the page. With Ajax, and that's what really makes a web page to become a web application, you actually have only first, you load the page, the HTML and CSS, in the bootstrap step. You just basically get some HTML and some scripts. And then when you click on, I put it here as action, in the same place as the link before, it's not that you refresh the page. Rather, you just trigger something. Then the JavaScript here in this page is going to do an Ajax request to the server. And then the server is going to respond with more data. And the JavaScript is going to be updating parts of the HTML and CSS. So this is a totally different proposition. And it was, of course, a very gradual process. But this is basically why it's different to create a web application than a website, and why it explains to me at least the existence of frameworks. For a long time, I actually thought that web frameworks were just because people wanted to write code and do complicated stuff. But over time, I started to understand that all of this, actually makes things more complicated. So anyway, these are a few differences between the web page and a web app that I stole from a previous presentation I gave. So basically, yeah, that a web page only retrieves info or sends it through a page refresh, and a web app doesn't do it. And a web app renders the page multiple times because it updates it, versus the web application versus the web page, which is just rendered once. And so anyway, and it's also interesting to consider that you think, especially if you are full stack or if you mostly tend towards the backend, you say, oh, creating a website, an interface, the design might be hard, but the programming behind it, actually, it's easy. But when you start to think and compare it with other problems that you are solving all the time, it's not trivial because, for example, in a batch program that you are running on a server, you don't really have much state. I mean, you just load a file from the disk usually, then you start performing computations. You just use the main memory for that. And then when you're done, you probably write something else to a file, and that's it. When you have, for example, a web server route, and this would be the backend part of web development. So you basically get a request, and then on the process of getting that request, you get some data from the client, and then you can take that data, you can interact with a database, and then you reply to that thing, and that's it. But you don't hold state in the middle. The database is in charge of holding that state. However, when you're actually creating a web application that has some state, you actually have to handle that state yourself here, and you need to trigger multiple interactions with its sequences. So actually, creating this is probably somewhat more complicated than just creating web routes that don't really have much state because they just put it in the database. So that's an observation for those of you that maybe think, what's the big deal with all this complexity on the front end? So anyway, if you want to create a web application as opposed to a website, you need JavaScript. So you need JavaScript at a minimum to perform bidirectional AJAX to basically send data to the server and then get the data back to this, from the server. Then you need to update parts of the view because remember, there's no page refresh. And then you have to handle the navigation on the client because you don't refresh the page. You need to change the URL, or you might use hash-based navigation. So this is basically a single page application. I'm sorry if some of this might be obvious. it probably is obvious for you. For me, like collecting all these facts took me a long while, and it's only now that I can just speak clearly about them. And anyway, optionally, you can generate the HTML and CSS on the client. This is client-side rendering. And you can also hold the state of the client itself in JavaScript. So anyway, this is just to go back to summarize. This is basically the patterns that you see in the terrain. Like these are the actual problems that you have when you're creating the front end of a web application. So now I'm just going to go with some solution patterns, like patterns that managed to solve the problems that I encountered when I was trying to build web applications. And also this is from Christopher Alexander. He really studies a lot carpets from the Middle Ages in the Muslim world, and he explains how the patterns are very sophisticated and interlaced. Again, I highly recommend that you take a look at his work. And anyway, my patterns are definitely not in the same category as this. So anyway, I am going to divide the patterns that I found in two, the solution patterns. I have the static ones, and then I'm going to have the dynamic ones later. So this image is from Raiders of the Lost Ark, and it really represents to me the embodiment of something like stock, stuff, state, just being there. So very static. So the thing about static patterns is that we're not going to be concerned how things change. We're just going to be concerned about what's there in place. So just let me see the questions to see somebody saying something. No, never mind. Thank you, Brujo. Yeah. So HTML and CSS generation, that's the first pattern. Let's just jump into it. So you need to generate HTML and CSS. You could technically do that from the server. I even did it back in the day, but I decided that the client should be able to generate its own HTML and CSS because actually of the second static pattern that we'll cover later. Just for now, bear with me and go with the assumption that we need to generate HTML and CSS on the client. Then we'll see why this is convenient. So normally, the general approach that you have towards this is that you use a markup language because, as you know, HTML is not a programming language. It's actually a markup. So you need to use some sort of thing that looks like HTML, but it's not HTML because it gives you the power to iterate over a collection and then just generate HTML from there or have some kind of conditional. It's a big topic, and I really don't want to get much into it. But essentially, there's ways to do it. The way that I chose to do it is I decided to represent HTML with JSON. JSON is a subset of JavaScript, which is basically objects and arrays in JavaScript land. So it's object literals and arrays, which are number lists and then key lists. You can name them as well. And then I found out, this was a few years ago, that it's actually quite easy to represent HTML with object literals and to generate HTML from object literals. So for now, you might not see the advantage, but at least you can see the direct mapping here. Like this is HTML here on top. And then here on the bottom, you have an array where the first element is a tag, which is a string P. And the second element is the content of the actual tag. So this can generate the HTML above. So we're going to the second example. You can have the same thing if you have a paragraph with a certain class. Then you can basically have an array where the first element is also a P, string P. And then you have an object here, which gives you the class and then the name of the class itself. You can start making this more complicated. You can start nesting tags. And for now, you might be asking, what's the reason for this? We'll just get there. Just give me a minute. But basically, you have a div. And then within the div, you have an array here. And then you can stick in the paragraph there. And you can see that this paragraph has both the attributes and the contents. So the thing about this is that this actually allows you to have some JavaScript code, which has basically unlimited power because it's a programming language. You have the unlimited code, so you're not dealing with some kind of markup construct like a for each or those things that you probably saw in Angular. So it's like a full-fledged programming language. And then you have like a conditional. Here's a ternary, for example. You have a certain condition, and then you can return a tag based on that condition, or you can return nothing. An empty array basically maps to nothing. Or you can set a class conditionally as well, like you see here. Or this is the best. You can iterate. I told you there was going to be no code, and I really lied there. But if you can follow more or less here without really getting too much into the details. So I'm basically generating a table by iterating items. And items is just an array of items. So I can return one of these objects that map to an HTML by iterating each of these items. And this is very powerful because you can basically have the unlimited power of JavaScript. Well, unlimited power. Anyway, you have the power of JavaScript, the power of a programming language, and then just return the HTML. And you can also do this with CSS. I didn't want to waste your time with this, but you can do the same thing with CSS. So you can generate the HTML like this. And so basically, the first static pattern that I see when you're just trying to solve the problem of front ends, web front ends, is that you have a function that receives something. We're going to see what soon. And then you just return these object literals that represent HTML and CSS. And there's really not much way around this. If you want to do client-side rendering, you need to generate this HTML, CSS at some point. So you might as well do it within a function. And instead of returning strings of HTML, CSS, it's actually much nicer to return these arrays and objects because there's many things that you don't have to be doing manually, and there's many sources of errors that you can avoid if you have this layer that converts these kinds of literals into HTML and CSS. So let's see if there's any questions so far. Oh, everything's good. So let's move on to the second static pattern, and it's the state is king. The state is everything. And what do I mean by this? So here we can see Thomas Hobbes, which is the main political theorist of the state. And basically here, Thomas Hobbes basically has an object literal in his heart. And this object literal, very simple as it is, it's the state. It's the state of the application. And this is essential because let's go back here. Let's go back to this picture here, the static pattern. See? All these boxes. I mean, yes, you're going to see the HTML and CSS on the page. There's no going around that. But that HTML and CSS is going to be determined, essentially, by the state of the client. The state of the client is basically everything. Is what interactions did the client have with the server? What data did the client fetch from the server? What data is currently being showed in the client itself? So all these things are the state, is whatever goes inside of each of these boxes. So the state is essential. And we're going to make the state king, and we're going to represent all the things that matter for the state of application, we're just going to stick them into this object called the state. So by no frills, I mean this is a plain object. That's it. So if you combine the two static patterns, the overall pattern is not that complicated. You know, you're going to have a function that takes the state as an argument, and we're just going to return object literals that represent HTML, CSS. So if you see things as unchanging, which they are not, but let's see it statically, that's the overall pattern you have here to generate views, to generate whatever is being shown on a screen in a web browser. You have a function of the state that returns object literals. Of course, you have this layer that converts the literals into the actual HTML, CSS, but that's fine. It's not a problem. So let's go with the dynamic patterns here in this running from the boulder. And the dynamic patterns are two as well. They're quite similar. I just put it in two, so it's easier to grasp. But basically, it's all about events. So if before in the two static patterns, we were concerned with things that happened like were immutable, not immutable, just like at one point in time, this is how things change. And the whole thing is based around events, or at least I found it very easy to reason about thinking with events. So the first type of events, well, before we even get into that, I just created my own event system. Since I'm creating my own framework, I might as well reinvent the wheel here as well. But actually, it wasn't that hard at all. And it was quite enlightening as to what parts are really essential to make this work. So I created an event system that is quite simple based on the following things. So you have a verb, you have a path, and then you have the argument. So when you fire an event, you just basically fire an event with a verb, with path, and then you can add optional arguments. So very clearly and related to data events, it's as simple as having 3 verbs. You don't need more than 3. I mean, you could have more for convenience, syntactic sugar, whatever. But basically, you can have add, set, and rem, which is short for remove, and then a path. And basically, what you can do with this is you can mutate the state. You can change the state. And also, instead of changing the state directly, you can actually change the state through an event. So this is the main pattern. For example, you have within the state, right? You have users. So I'm just going to set users. I'm going to initialize the users to an array with 2 elements. These are very simple things, of course, because I want to keep the slides short. But I'm just setting users to an array with 2 elements, ID1 and ID2. And then, for example, and as you can see, red here is the verb. Green is the path. All of these paths are kind of, I want to say trivial, but they are simple because they only have 1 element. I'm just affecting a top-level element of the state, but nevertheless, this is how you would express it. And here, in this second thing, I'm adding another user, which is ID3. And then, in the last one, I am removing the second element, because JavaScript is 0-indexed, as 0-indexed arrays. I'm removing the second element from users. So these events basically can modify the state. And at the same time, they have other good properties. So basically, what they do is they modify the store, and then they fire an event. And why do we fire an event? Because there's going to be some other parts of the page, of the system, that are going to be interested on when certain parts of the store change. So that's why we also fire an event. So this is the data events pattern, the simple dynamic pattern. So far, so good. Let me check if there's any questions. Okay, I hope I'm not losing you. Just feel free to ask me anything. So the complex events pattern is when you have to create operations that are not just about writing something into the state, but rather you need to do something more before you write to the state. After, you might do it conditionally on the state having a certain condition or not. So for example, like imagine you have a system for managing users. So you want to submit a new user, right? So here you have the verb submit. The path would be, well, here's a typo. It should be users, plural. Sorry about that. And then you just submit the actual argument, which is the new user you want to create with the ID 4. Or for example, imagine you want to retrieve all users. So retrieve users. And then you want to add a filter. I mean, we haven't seen this, but it's you could totally imagine. Actually, I have written code like this. So these events are more sophisticated, and that's why I call them complex, because they optionally read the store. And by store, I mean state. I'm really mixing the terms here. I apologize. It should say state here, but it's the same thing. They are just reading that big object in the center of Thomas Hobbes' heart. And then after they read it, they perform some computation, or they just do an AJAX request to the server. Usually it's AJAX. Then they update the store optionally, depends on if they're bringing data that is interesting or not. And this is perhaps very interesting. They can also trigger other events. So an event handler can trigger another event, directly or indirectly. So basically, if you put all of this together, and I hope this is not too confusing, a view is essentially a function that takes a path. This path basically tells it what part of the state am I interested in taking a look at, like from which part do I depend? Because you can depend from the whole thing, or you can just depend from a small area. For example, if you're creating a view to list users, you would only depend here from users. You wouldn't depend from, I don't know, permissions. You would depend only on the users. Then you have a bunch of complex events that you can put associated to the view. So for example, if you're managing users, then the event to submit a user or retrieve users are going to be listed here. The advantage is that if you tie those complex events to a certain view, you don't have to worry about the life cycle of the event. So whenever this view is not live on the system, then the event doesn't exist. And when the view is drawn, the event is automatically just created, so it's there. So the life cycles are tied to each other. And then you have the function, the actual function that receives the state. In this case, it could be users, for example. And then we're going to return the object literals. For now, just see this. So this is not that different from the previous one. This is the dynamic version of what we saw before, which is this function that returns you this object literal with stringified event, with stringified event handlers. Because here's the deal. The user is only going to be able to see HTML and CSS. So you need to find a way to tie the HTML and CSS to triggering some events. So you can basically stick it into onClick or on whatever triggers in the DOM, and then you're just going to generate and touch this whole event system. So this is when you put all four patterns together. So that's pretty much it for the solution patterns. Let's see if there's any questions. Well, let's keep on going with the implementation patterns. I will try to keep it short. Yep. So anyway, there's more than one. I don't know if you ever played around with any front-end library, or you even saw how they're implemented. But when you actually start to think about this problem, is you might have a very fancy and nice event system. You might have a state. You might have this layer that prevents you from just stringifying HTML things to each other. So all is good and dandy. But at some point, you need to change parts of the HTML and CSS that is on the page. So there's, well, the obvious approach would be to say, hey, I don't know, I have a div, and I need to change the whole content of this div. So I'm just going to recalculate this whole div, and then whatever comes out from here, I'm just going to stick it into the inner HTML of that div. So whatever was before is gone, and I just put new HTML there. So that's not very efficient if you're, for example, changing a large view just with a small change. And also you can lose a lot of state. Like, for example, if you have dropdowns or stuff like that, it's very hard or almost impossible to store that state. So it's much easier to, instead of just throwing an atomic bomb inside that div, you can actually do something like diffing the div. So that's the approach I took. And why do I call this flatten instead of diff? Because I'll just explain you in a minute. So basically, the folks that actually did React had this problem because essentially when you're trying to create a div of a piece of HTML, you're basically diffing two trees because HTML is a nested structure. You can represent HTML with tree. So right now, the state of computer science, and I don't know if this is going to improve much or not because nobody has established the lower bounds, but basically the best algorithms for creating a diff of a tree are cubic, which means that they get very slow very quickly. So essentially, you cannot really go with a decent, like a direct approach. You cannot just say, okay, I'm just going to create the diff of the old HTML and the new HTML and apply those changes. So I came up with a very hacky solution or pattern that actually seems to work, which is I flatten the tree into an array of strings, and I actually diff them with the Myers algorithm. And I don't know if you ever heard of this, but this is the same algorithm that is used, for example, by Git to see the diff between two files that you are basically committing. When you have committing a new file and you want to see the diff with the old file, use the Myers algorithm. So basically, the Myers algorithm only works with strings. I mean, it works with files. So I basically flattened these tree structures that I created with the object literals, and then just I diff them. And if they really take a long time in doing the diff, I basically give up after so many milliseconds. Right now, I hard coded it at 200 milliseconds. And this will happen a lot if you're comparing two HTML pieces that are very different. But when they are actually not that different, this works. The diff is quick, and then I can apply the diff to the DOM, basically to HTML and CSS. So in the end, this very hacky solution ended up working. So it's an interesting pattern to see that sometimes if you don't go with the correct approach, it's fine. It might still work. I mean, it was a total bet, but empirically, it paid off. So I really don't want to get into much detail here, but also when you're redrawing views, there's a few tricky things that you need to take care of. One is that you don't want to redraw, like you have views within views, and that's why you have this like this door that never ceases to be open because you have views, and inside the view you have another view. And that's actually quite common and quite useful. So you need to apply priorities, lower priorities to the views that are inside the other ones in case that both the outer and the inner view want to be redrawn at the same time. And then I'm just going to explain one more thing. I'm just going to leave the last one because it's pretty arcane. So basically, I just basically made all the basic verbs for modifying the store to trigger this change verb. And this change verb is essentially the one in charge of redrawing my views. So essentially, I just put a listener that whenever something is added, set, or removed, change is fired. And change basically triggers the view redrawing mechanism. So that's essentially the implementations patterns I just wanted to cover with you. And I'm just going to leave this for some other time. This is my framework. You can take a look whenever you want. Feel free to make any questions. And yeah, the name is Gatov. It's probably the only framework that guarantees that you're going to go to the B. So anyway, that's it. Any questions?
I don't think there are any. The only one was about the author of the patterns book. I already replied, so I think that's it.
Fantastic.
Thank you, Mono. Thank you, Mono. Thank you, everybody, for being with us during this beta testing. Every feedback is welcome. Just write up on our Slack or YouTube or whatever. Send us an email, find us on Twitter or whatever you want. We need to learn how to do this better, of course. So we want your help for that. Don't think it was this thing was going to be free for you. So with that said,
thank you so much for showing up, everyone.
And for now, that's all. We will let you know when the episode number 1 comes along. It will not be. It will be soon. It will not be too much time to wait. So thank you again.
Also, very important last thing, Brujo. Sorry, if anyone wants to give a talk, just let us know.
Of course,
we're open to speakers.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye bye.
3, 2, 1.